January 11th, 2011, a federal courthouse in San Francisco. 5 lawyers in expensive suits sit across from a 21-year-old who codes out of his parents' bedroom in New Jersey. They represent one of the most valuable electronics companies on earth. He has no lawyer. He has $32 to his name. The judge has just signed an order almost no court has ever signed. A subpoena for every single IP address that clicked play on this kid's videos, not just him, his entire audience. But here's what makes this case extraordinary. That kid has already done 2 things the world thought were impossible. At 17, he cracked open the most hyped phone in history, built by the most powerful company alive. Then he broke the one console the entire global hacking community had publicly given up on. And weeks before those lawyers walked into that courtroom, he handed the keys to Sony's kingdom to everyone with an internet connection. Within 90 days, the decision to crush him will cost Sony $171 million and the personal data of 77 million customers. How did one teenager humiliate the most powerful tech companies on Earth? And how did trying to silence him become one of the most catastrophic decisions in the history of the industry? To understand how a single bedroom in New Jersey ended up at the center of a federal lawsuit, you have to start with a kid who physically could not stand the idea of something being sealed shut. He grows up in Glen Rock, a quiet New Jersey suburb where nobody is supposed to make headlines. By his early teens, he is at Bergen County Academies, the kind of magnet school that collects prodigies the way other schools collect detention slips. While most of his classmates are building simple games, George Hotz is wiring together a homemade 3-dimensional imaging rig from scratch. He carries it to the Intel International Science Fair. He walks out with $20,000 in scholarship money and his face on national television. A string-bean teenager explaining motion capture to a morning news anchor, looking like he is slightly bored by his own genius. This is who he was before the world heard of him. A polite, fast-talking kid with a tinkerer's mind who looks at any closed system the way other people look at a puzzle. Closed equals broken. Sealed equals temporary. Then, in the summer of 2007, a small device comes onto the market that the entire planet wants, and almost nobody can fully own. The iPhone. You probably remember the launch. Lines around the block. Late-night television losing its mind. A glass slab from the most valuable company in the world. And built into every single unit. One rule. You can buy it for $600. But you cannot use it on any network that is not AT&T in the United States. The phone is yours, and not yours at the same time. A leash dressed as a luxury product. Hotz is 17. He looks at the leash and starts unscrewing it. For 5 weeks, squeezed between high school and a part-time job, he camps in his bedroom with the device, a stack of forums, an eyeglass screwdriver, and a guitar pick to pry the case. He maps the board. He identifies the single chip standing between him and freedom. A tiny processor that enforces the carrier lock. He realizes that if he can briefly send a controlled jolt of voltage to one specific pin on that chip, the lock will not check the carrier. The phone will simply forget who it is supposed to obey. He solders wires. He runs his code. He inserts a SIM card from a different network. It works. In the early hours of a summer morning in a New Jersey bedroom, the first unlocked iPhone in the world boots up on a network it was never meant to know. He does what any 17-year-old does. He films it. He uploads the video. Within hours, it explodes across the internet. Within a week, the most valuable company on Earth has been beaten by a teenager working at a kitchen table. Feel the size of that, the way the world felt it. Apple is not a small business by then. Apple is a religion with a stock chart. And a kid with $20 of tools at home has just told everybody that the new sacred object can be opened with a screwdriver. The reaction is not what you would expect. Lawyers do not show up at his door. A businessman does. A man from a phone repair company drives down to New Jersey and offers Hotz a sports car and 3 more iPhones in exchange for the unlocked unit. Hotz hands over the phone and drives away in a Nissan 350Z, 17 years old, with a license still warm in his wallet. Then, a few weeks later, a quiet email lands in his inbox. The sender is the co-founder of Apple, Steve Wozniak, the original tinkerer, the man who built the company in a garage by opening every machine he could find. Wozniak does not threaten him. Wozniak congratulates him. 5 weeks, 1 bedroom, a stack of forums, and a guitar pick. That is how Hotz taught himself to do the impossible, alone and the hard way. But the phone, even with the carrier lock broken, is not enough for him. Phones are easy. A phone has a few chips and a battery. He wants the one machine the entire hacking world has been trying and failing to crack for years. A black plastic box, untouched since launch, owned by a company that has none of Apple's patience for clever kids. The machine is a PlayStation 3. By 2009, it is the white whale of the hacking world. The Xbox has fallen. The Wii has fallen. Every other console on the market has been peeled open and modded by someone, somewhere. The PS3 has been on shelves for 3 years and not a single person has touched its core. The reason is engineering. Sony has wrapped the console in layers of encryption, hypervisors, signed code, and hardware fuses. To break it, you do not just defeat one defense, you defeat a whole stack of them, each one watching the others. The community has tried. The community has walked away. Hotz writes a blog post in December 2009 that says, in effect, hold my drink. He is going after it. 5 weeks later, he posts an update. He has a hardware exploit, a way to use a tiny physical hole to make a much larger software hole, large enough to walk through. He has read and write access to the system's memory, high-level access to the processor. He has done what nobody on Earth has done. He is 20 years old. He publishes the exploit publicly, not for piracy. He has been clear about that from the beginning. He believes that something you bought is something you own, and something you own is something you should be allowed to open. He releases the work as a gift to everyone who already paid Sony $400 for the box on their living room floor. Sony, unlike Apple, does not send congratulations. Sony's answer arrives as a mandatory firmware update. And the update does not just patch the hole. The update strips a feature called Other OS from every PlayStation 3 in the world. Until that day, anyone who owned a PS3 could install Linux on it, turn it into a computer, run scientific code, use the hardware they had purchased however they chose. After that day, they could not. Sony reached through the internet and removed something millions of paying customers had legally bought. Sit with what just happened. Because this is the moment the war changes shape. To close a hole one kid opened, Sony has chosen to break the property of every honest customer it has. The kid is one. The customers are millions. And millions are watching. The backlash is immediate. Owners are furious. A class action lawsuit is filed against Sony itself. Universities that had bought racks of PlayStations to run cheap scientific simulations watched their clusters die overnight. Air Force researchers who had built a supercomputer out of consumer consoles lose part of their hardware to a corporate decision they had no say in. Forums fill with screenshots of the update prompt and one question, repeated in 20 languages. Is the thing I paid for still mine? The company has just turned a lone bedroom hacker into a public cause. And Hotz is suddenly not a hobbyist. He is the face of everyone Sony has betrayed. Then, in the middle of 2010, exhausted by the constant attention, the overflowing inbox, and the pressure to keep going, George Hotz publicly walks away. He posts a goodbye, says he is done with the PS3, says he is moving on. He thanks the community and logs off. For the first time, the story looks over. The kid won. The company punished its own customers. The kid retired with the trophy. The moment passed. It is not over. It is barely begun. Because the door Hotz opened cannot be closed. And somewhere in Germany, a small group of hackers nobody has heard of yet has been quietly studying Sony's code, looking for a mistake. They are about to find one. Not a small mistake. A mistake so fundamental that the entire security architecture of the PS3 will collapse like a rotten beam. December 2010. The annual Chaos Communication Congress in Berlin, the hacker world's biggest stage. A group called Fail Zero Overflow steps up to the microphone. and in front of a packed auditorium, they explain, with the calm of people delivering a math proof, that Sony has made a catastrophic error. Inside the PS3 signing system, Sony was supposed to generate a fresh random number every time the console verified a piece of code. That random number is the spine of the entire security model. If it changes, the lock holds. If it ever repeats, the whole lock falls apart, because the secret master key can be calculated from the public signatures using nothing more exotic than high school algebra. Sony did not generate a random number. They wrote a single fixed value into the code and called it random. Every single time. That one line of laziness means the master key to the PlayStation 3 can be derived by anyone with a notebook and enough time. The console is not just broken. It is permanently, mathematically unpatchable. Any real fix requires new silicon, and that silicon is already sitting in living rooms around the world. George Hotz watches the talk, and the retirement ends. Days later, on his personal website, he publishes the master key. Pages of it, a long scrolling string of hexadecimal characters that is, in cryptographic terms, the deed to Sony's kingdom. The internet downloads it. Within hours, mirror copies have spread to thousands of sites in dozens of countries. Sony will never put this back in the box. Then Hotz does something that, even by his own standards, is a deliberate provocation. He records a rap track and posts it online. The lyrics are aimed directly at Sony's lawyers, at the company's executives, at the whole posture of the corporation. The kid is openly laughing at the giant on its own internet. The giant decides it has had enough. In January 2011, Sony Computer Entertainment America files suit. The complaint names George Hotz and pleads violations of the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, computer fraud, copyright infringement, breach of contract, and a string of state law claims that, stacked together, could ruin him permanently. 5 lawyers go up against one 21-year-old who can barely afford a hard drive. That is the visible escalation. The invisible one is worse. Sony goes to a federal magistrate and asks for something that should never have been granted. They ask for the server logs of his personal blog, every IP address that ever loaded the page where he posted the keys. They ask for the same from his YouTube account, every person who pressed play on the rap video. They ask for his PayPal records, his Twitter records, his Google account data. They get all of it. Now read that carefully, because this is the moment the case stops being about a console. Sony's lawyers are now in a position to compile a list of every member of his audience. Every person who watched a kid mock a corporation has been reduced in a federal court order to an entry on a spreadsheet that Sony can demand explanations from. To make the picture even uglier, Sony also tells the court that Hotz has fled the United States and is hiding in South America to evade jurisdiction. He has done no such thing. He flew to a security conference, gave a talk, and came home. The accusation is quietly dropped later. The damage has already been done. What you are watching is a corporation trying to bully a 21-year-old and his entire audience into silence at the same time. He has no money. He has no legal team. The hourly rate of one of Sony's lawyers is more than he has ever earned in his life. He is being asked to fight a war of attrition against an opponent that can simply outlast him until his bank account empties. There is one variable Sony has not accounted for. Hotz is not alone anymore. 2 years of stripped Linux features, corporate overreach, and public bullying have produced something the company never modeled for: an audience that is angry. And on the internet, an audience that is angry is a force with its own gravity. Within days of the lawsuit becoming public, donation pages appear. Strangers from around the world wire him money to hire actual lawyers. The amount is not large by Sony's standards. It is enormous by his. He suddenly has a defense: forums, gaming sites, programming communities, and even mainstream tech press shift their language. A story that had opened as a hacker dispute is now being framed as a question about property rights. Whether the console on your shelf is actually yours. Whether a 30-second clause buried in a user agreement nobody reads can quietly mean that it is not. The names of Sony's lawyers begin appearing in news articles next to the price tag of the court order they obtained. The audience the corporation tried to map has just remembered it is public. Then a much larger force notices. A loose collective of online activists that the world has been learning to spell calls itself anonymous. They have a habit of picking fights with institutions they believe overreach. In early 2011, they publish a press release naming Sony as a target. They say plainly that Sony has victimized its own customers, that the company has tried to suppress the truth about how its own products work, and that Anonymous is going to make that decision expensive. Then they start hitting. The attacks are denial of service. They flood Sony's websites with traffic until the sites go dark. Online stores blink offline. Customer service pages stop loading. Corporate infrastructure falls silent. The pressure is constant, distributed, and very public. Every news article about the lawsuit now leads with the fact that the company is being bombarded over it. But the legal arithmetic for Hotz personally is unforgiving. The case can drag on for years. Each motion costs more than he can raise. Each new filing exposes more of his data and the data of his audience. Dragging the war out does not just risk bankrupting him. It risks pulling thousands of people who only clicked on a video into Sony's discovery files. The vice tightens until there is only one move left that protects everybody else. In April 2011, George Hotz signs a settlement. He agrees to a permanent injunction barring him from ever touching a Sony product again. He agrees to never publish work on Sony hardware again. He agrees, in legal effect, to lay his sword down. The headlines read like a corporate victory. The kid blinked. The giant won. The system worked. That is the shape of it from the outside. From inside, you can see the trade he is actually making. He is giving up his right to fight in order to protect the people who fought with him. He is being asked by a system he has no way to beat in court to silence himself. He does it on paper. The war is over. Sony has its win. And then Sony finds out what its win actually costs. Less than a week after the settlement, the PlayStation network goes dark. In the third week of April 2011, Sony engineers detect that someone has gotten inside the network hosting 77 million customer accounts. It is not a probe. It is a breach straight through the perimeter. Names, addresses, dates of birth, email accounts, and encrypted password hashes of millions of customers have been pulled out. Sony pulls the plug. They take the entire PlayStation network offline. For days, then a week, then 2 weeks, then 23 days. Every PlayStation owner on Earth cannot log in, cannot play online, cannot buy a game. The store is dark. The chat is dark. The world's most expensive entertainment service has gone completely silent. The bill, when it is finally tallied, runs to roughly $171 million in direct costs, on top of public trust damage that no spreadsheet can accurately price. At the time, it is one of the largest consumer data breaches the industry has ever seen. Now read the next part carefully, because the angle of this story collapses if it gets blurred. The intrusion is never publicly attributed to George Hotz. He had nothing to do with it. He says so, plainly, on the record. He condemns it. Even Anonymous, the collective that had been openly attacking Sony, denies stealing the data. The actual perpetrators are never definitively identified. What is documented is the climate. Sony lit a firestorm by suing a kid. The firestorm drew every grudge holder on the internet to a single target. Somewhere inside that firestorm, an intrusion succeeded that the company might otherwise have weathered, or never invited at all. Sony won its case against one curious 21-year-old. And then it lost a number that no court would ever have ordered him to pay. Look at the opening image again. The 5 lawyers. The judge's order demanding IP addresses. The kid at his parents' house. See what was actually happening. The giant in that picture was not crushing a child. The giant was detonating itself. The consequences deserve to be acknowledged honestly. Sony's reputation takes years to recover. The Linux feature removed from millions of consoles never comes back. George Hotz can never legally speak about Sony hardware again. The court order targeting his audience stands as a precedent the internet will not forget. None of that was free. But the kid does not vanish. The same establishment that watched him get dragged into court walks up to him and offers him a chair at its own table. Google hires him onto an elite security team called Project Zero, the unit that hunts the kind of vulnerabilities he used to find for fun. He stays as long as he wants. Then he founds his own company, a self-driving car startup, run out of a garage in San Francisco. Because driving is just another locked system to him, and he intends to open it. He builds the prototype in a month. He sells modified kits over the internet so that anyone can turn a car they already own into a semi-autonomous machine. The same instinct, scaled up. The thing you bought is yours, and yours includes the right to teach it new tricks. He gives television interviews. He delivers keynote talks. He becomes, without ever asking for the title, a quiet legend. Which brings us back to the email. Years before the lawsuit, before the breach, before any of it. The co-founder of Apple had written to a 17-year-old to say congratulations. The original tinkerer recognized the next one. Wozniak saw in the kid with the screwdriver the future of the same instinct he had built his entire life on. The instinct that the thing you bought is something you may understand. That locks are conversations, not endings. They could lock down every chip they ever shipped. They could not lock down a curious mind. And the moment they tried, they proved it on a scale they will never live down. The thing you bought is yours, and somewhere out there is another teenager opening another lock. The next time the giants discover what curiosity costs them, you already know who is going to be holding the screwdriver.